Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome the Armenian American Medical Society. I am Dr. Jane Mahakian, and I'm a gerontologist and the founder of Alzheimer's Care Armenia. This afternoon, I'm going to be presenting Step Into My Shoes, Validating the Person with Alzheimer's. So today, I'm going to be talking about really understanding the person that has dementia, as well as what are some of the best communication and empowerment techniques and strategies you can use as a healthcare professional, not only to help that person that has a dementia, but also to help their family caregiver. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the practical steps you can use every day to make that person feel validated. So as you all know, dementia affects 1 in 8 Americans older than the age of 65. Right now, we can slow down the disease progression, but we cannot right now prevent it. And many of you know also that dementia is really an umbrella term, right? It's describes a set of memory and cognitive decline symptoms. It's really an overall term that describes a wide range of symptoms. And Alzheimer's is a disease. It's the leading cause of dementia, accounting for anywhere from about 50 to 80% of the people in the United States that have a cognitive impairment. So today, I think it's really important to look at, how we communicate and how we think about the person that has a cognitive impairment. And some of the items I'm going to be looking into and diving in a little deeper today is really understanding that person's behavior. So many times I'll receive a call from a family that their parent or grandparent is having some challenging type behaviors, such as wanting to leave the home and not believing that that's their home, hoarding behaviors, agitation, as well as paranoia type thought processes. Talking about the here and now is one of the strategies I'm going to go into a little bit later in my talk, as well as really focusing on the positives with the person, focusing on what they can do, not on what they can't, and really recognizing how behaviors communicate unmet needs. And I'll share a story with you, and I'll be sharing several stories with you throughout this presentation. The first story is a gentleman who was in his mid-80s, and he was living in a memory care community. And he had lived in the community for several months, and one of the ongoing challenging type behaviors that the administrator of the community was sharing with me was that he continued to, during mealtime only, to pound on the table, and they really couldn't figure it out. So they had, worked with him on changing the location of his where he dines, but that really didn't help. They initially thought it was, perhaps something that he had done before, but they really weren't sure what it was about. So I was brought on to consult on the case and spoke to his nephew. And it turns out that this person was a judge. He was a retired judge. So what was going on was that he was pounding, on the table because he wanted to have order in the court. And he felt that, he wasn't able to communicate, that it was just too much stimulation in that dining room. So once he was assigned to a dining room that had maybe half of the residents in that dining room, that behavior stopped. But the administrator was quite concerned. She didn't really understand what was behind the behavior. So it was solved, and the resolution was decreasing the stimulation when he ate his meals. Providing engagement and stimulation for that person is something I'll be speaking about also. It's very important to have structure and predictability when you have a person that has a dementia such as Alzheimer's disease. So these are just some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. One of the number one concept and most important part of my presentation is that the person is always right. So the person with moderate stage Alzheimer's disease needs to feel that he or she is right and correct. And there's, of course, a story behind this. It was maybe 1989, 1990, when I took my dear grandmother Vartanush to Las Vegas. And it was just the two of us, and my grandmother had cognitive impairment. It was a vascular dementia that she had. And needless to say, her skill set for playing the slot machines was something she always had, and she loved playing the slot machines. So off to Las Vegas we went. When we arrived, she began, she hit the slots and began to play the dollar machine. And dollar after dollar, an hour went by or so, and she turned to me and said, "Honey, let's go grab some lunch, and then we'll come back to this machine and we'll continue playing because I feel lucky at this machine." So after lunch, we went back on the floor and she began to look for the machine. So I told her, "Come this way. This is where the machine is. Your machine is this way." She said, "No, honey, it's the other way. And it's 2 aisles down. And I know this is the machine." And she walked over to a machine that wasn't her machine, but she thought it was her machine. And I insisted, and I said, "No, Vartanush, Grandma, this is not your machine. It's 2 aisles, it's up a little further." She said, "No, honey, it's not. Sit down. I'm going to play." So she began to play this machine, and I, thought, well, I need to let go of this, And about 10, 15 minutes into playing, she hit the jackpot. And she hit a jackpot of $2,500. So she started jumping up and down and was very excited and very happy, and turned to me and said, "Honey, I know you're studying, to become a doctor, and you work with old people, but I want you to know something." And I said, "Well, what is it? What is it, Grandma? What do you want me to know?" And she said, "I want you to remember that people with memory loss like me were always right." So that kind of was really a very important moment for me, and my, in thinking about, the type of work and the type of really the more philosophy of working with people here in Orange County, as well as bringing my work now, of course, to Armenia. So Grandma Vartanush really set the stage. The person with Alzheimer's is always right, with the exception, if their safety is of concern, then of course you don't want to validate that. and you want to redirect them to a different thought or to something else. But making that person feel right is really what it's all about. So keep in mind, when we arrived back at the airport the next day, my grandmother turned to me and said, well, where are we coming from? Where did we go? So she had forgotten that we were in Las Vegas. Many times the concept of dementia and time, it's not sequential. There's no continuity to it. So the past can be confused with the present, and memory may be there one moment and gone the next. And the person with dementia really knows what they know at really any given moment, right? So you really want to step into their shoes by just being present with them. And that's one of the keys to working with people, with patients that have a memory impairment, is to go where they are and to see where they are, because they may not be, in 2023. They may be back in 1961. So you really want to figure that out. I think that's very important, especially for many of us clinicians who are working with people in a more what we call a person-centered plan of care, where that person's care is really the plan is really focused on what is best for that particular individual. So the person with Alzheimer's can be engaged through purposeful activities. Earlier this year, and I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth with my work here in Orange County as well as my work in Armenia. This is a delightful photo of 3 individuals who attend our memory cafe in Yerevan. And the memory cafe it's a club. And it's a club where people feel a sense of belonging. These people all have some degree of a cognitive impairment. Many of them are or will be under the care of a neurologist. Their real purpose weekly is to really feel a sense not only of belonging, but also to have engagement and have cognitive stimulation. When they get up on a Wednesday morning, they know where they're going. And that's very important for all of us, whether we have a cognitive impairment or not, to know what we're doing during the day. So when we roll out of bed, we know where we're going. We know what we've planned or not planned for the day. The same thing with the person that has a cognitive impairment. It's very important to know what that person to know what they're doing, what they're up to. That will help provide not only cognitive stimulation, but also a sense of purpose. And it gives them the structure to their day, which is very, very important. Many times the people are retired, so they've left their previous professional roles. So really feeling that sense of accomplishment and purpose in this club is very important. The Memory Cafe was so successful. We've actually now launched one in Goomery, and I'm pleased to say that our psychologist that facilitates the Goomery Memory Cafe reported to me this morning in a team meeting that she now has 15 people, and so in a waiting list now. So we're excited about that. It really provides a routine for that person, and very important for their sense of self. So validating the reality of the person with Alzheimer's disease, really you want to, I'm going to kind of jump into the second one, because I think the second point of realizing there's a reason behind all behavior is very important. So the person with dementia often struggles with self-awareness, right? They many times know that they have a cognitive issue going on, and so they need to feel effective. Sometimes what happens is that because of the changes in the ability to communicate, they're not able to properly tell you what they're feeling or what they're thinking. So many times that person is drawn to the past or pushed from the present to satisfy their needs. And they either resolve, retreat, relieve, or relive that need that is expressed. So the basin of water story is a true story. In fact, all of my stories are true stories, of course. But the story is about a gentleman named Walter who had incontinence. And he was very embarrassed to have incontinence, urinary incontinence. And he explained that his pants had become wet because somebody had thrown a cup of water at him. So the staff at this memory care community joined him in that idea and validated that story that, oh, yes, and we're really very sorry that somebody had, accidentally put some water on your pants. So that preserved his sense of dignity, and it also made him feel like there was really nothing wrong in going on with him. So realizing there's reason behind the behavior is important. Maybe 2.5, 3 weeks ago, the team in Armenia, the multidisciplinary healthcare team in Armenia with the brain health team, called me and said that there was a family member. They received a call from a lady who was her mother was 89 years old and had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease around 4 years ago. This family member reported to our psychologist and physician that her mom was going out into the backyard and was burying her and digging in the backyard and burying her jewelry. And now, they were quite distressed because they couldn't find it. And they did not understand, what was this about? Why would the mom hide things? What is that about? And so she was also hiding items in the home too. So they didn't really understand, what is this purpose of hiding things or gathering items? So the person that has this, if you're seeing this kind of behaviors, the gathering of items and hiding those items is a way that the person feels safe. So to gather items such as a handbag or in a purse or in a larger bag is important for that person to have a container to put these items in. It makes them feel safe, and those items are important to them. So hiding these items has a lot to do with the person's sometimes paranoid thought process, and that they want to keep those items safe. So once the daughter understood this, they could learn how to redirect their mom and actually encourage her to keep her items in a special place in the home. And that's what we're currently working on with the family. So many times, not only in our country, but other countries, there's quite a lot of stigma and myths about dementia. There's a shame. Many times people don't feel that people with a dementia, such as Alzheimer's, have a purpose or contribute to society. So we need to kind of look at changing our thought process about that. We really can gain a lot from people who have a memory impairment. We really can learn a lot by being present and in the moment, just as they are. And also realizing it's the journey that matters. It's really not about our final destination. And the last thing is to really to see how the person can teach you about life and living, right? So in working with families here, it's really having them understand it's not just simply a disease of the brain. There's purpose and meaning into what they do. And so it allows you to kind of slow down, to be more present, and to really get in touch with that person's sense of self. That person's sense of self will always be there, even in the latter stages of the disease. Even when they say, I don't know who you are, and you're the daughter or the son, that person is still there and you can still reach that person. So now I'm going to stop here and tell you that, and please write this down, your secret code for receiving your CME credit certificate is the word colorful. So I think the word colorful is very fitting for this presentation. So that is your secret code. Please write it down because you will be tested on it a little later. So validating that person with Alzheimer's disease, they really need to feel just like you and I do, that they're succeeding in the world around them. And when there's stimulation and there's less withdrawal inward. So I'm going to share a story, Sarah's story. It's also Seta's story. And Seta was a woman living in one of the villages around 2.5 hours outside of Yerevan, who had advanced Alzheimer's disease, and the family really was not understanding the disease progression or really what they could do with Seta in terms of the quality of her life. And what had happened was that Seta began to shut down and she began to retreat. And the family didn't understand really how to include her because she was so confused. She spent a lot of time in her room and now in her bed. So when my team and I came upon her, we met with the entire family as well as with Seta. And we realized that it wasn't so much the progression of her Alzheimer's disease in the moderate to beginning latter stages of the disease, is why she was retreating. It was because she lacked stimulation. There was no engagement. She was also really not wanting to eat anymore. There were no swallowing difficulties. It was more of just shutting down. We were able to rule out a swallowing difficulty, which was important to do first, of course. But what we decided to do was to bring in music. We brought her out into the family gathering room, the living room, and made her feel like she was part of whatever they were doing. And for example, she could no longer prepare a meal, but she could certainly fold clothes or towels. So giving her these type of jobs. Little by little, after a week or two, we came back and we were receiving reports from the family all the while. And she actually improved. She was actually much more engaged. She was no longer in bed. She was actually folding clothes and folding towels, and her appetite improved, and she was no longer retreating. So it gave that person, it gave Seta a sense of engagement, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. So people that have a cognitive impairment, of course, need a sense of purpose, just like we do. Families many times come to me and say, you know, my mom can no longer manage her finances. She can no longer cook and clean. Really, what can she do? What can we do to promote her sense of independence? So we start with really focusing on what can that person do? Even in the latter stages, what can that person do? And focusing on activities that reinforce those cognitive learnings, promote that positive feeling for that person, and maximize their sense of independence. Sometimes incorporating hobbies and interests such as puzzles or painting hobbies such as building simple cars that snap together, things like this that really help boost their sense of confidence is something you can do and share. Sometimes we as healthcare professionals, we want to provide, the families will come to us and say, I've told my mom 4 or 5 times, that she keeps repeating the same information to me. She keeps asking me, when is her doctor appointment? And I've told her 4 or 5 times, and I'm getting frustrated. Really, what can you do? How can you help that family member, the caregiver, understand that? Writing things down and giving them a note card of saying, when is the appointment with Dr. Smith, for example? Not dwelling on remember this or remember that. People do not want to be reminded that they don't remember, right? So they really have a single point of focus. So you really don't want to say, well, remember when I told you this and remember when I told you that, because that just creates, quite a lot of anxiety for the person. And I know too, many times with our parent that has a dementia, sometimes we become, as children, quite concerned and sometimes fearful of us acquiring, some kind of a cognitive issues. So we really kind of need to move beyond our own anxieties, right? I've also noticed that one way to really understand that person is to really understand the stories that the person makes up. So sometimes that person will make up stories as a way of seeking peace or a way of fighting fear. So what are some of those stories that a person makes up? For example, one of the stories is, I want to go home. That's a big thing. The person now lives in a memory care community and they say to the front desk clerk, I want to go home. This is not my home. Or they're living at home and they don't believe that they're at home. So what do? Do you say, well, this is your home? So what you can do is you can say, you know what, we're going to go home very soon. Because if you remind them that this is their home, they're going to end up feeling bad that they don't remember that that's their home. So making up a story sometimes is seeking peace or a way of fighting fear. I'm going to tell you a story about a dear client of mine, maybe in maybe 2002, who was living in his own Victorian home up in the San Francisco area. And I received the referral from an accountant, and we'll call this person Joe. So Joe was living in a very large Victorian home by himself. His wife had passed away maybe 15 years ago. And he and his wife, I had learned from the accountant, did not have a very strong marriage. Joe was a merchant marine and traveled around the world, and his wife developed her own life. And And every now and then, when he would come into port in San Francisco, they'd get together. But, they lived pretty independent lives. When I received the referral to make a home visit to see Joe and to evaluate what his care needs were, it was because Joe had been coming to the accountant's office every day for the last week. And every day for the last week, he was bringing the same paperwork to the accountant's office, and the accountant pretty much figured out on day 2 that there was a problem going on here. He seemed confused. He couldn't remember things, so he called me. So when I went to see Joe, I knocked on his door, went up a flight of stairs, knocked on the door, and nobody answered. I thought, well, I'll call him. I went back to my car and gave Joe a call, and he answered the phone. And he said, "What are you doing in your car? Why don't you come on up? I'll open the door." When he opened the door, the home was the home was full of stuff. There were many boxes and newspapers and things piled very high, even higher than how tall I am. And there were pathways going into the home, and there were pathways leading to the kitchen and to the dining room and to the living room. This is how Joe lived. And I said to him, "Sir, are you moving?" Because it looked like, boxes and all kinds of stuff. He said, "No, I live like this, don't you?" So we ended up sitting at his kitchen table, and Joe, I noticed that Joe appeared to look like he needed some water, right? So I had a feeling there was some dehydration going on, and I asked him what he had had for breakfast, and Joe said, I had some cookies. And he said, "They're in there." And I opened up the refrigerator only to be greeted by about 40 to 50 boxes of shortbread cookies. So clearly this person was not caring for himself. So why am I telling you the story? Is because he was making up stories. And he looked to me and he said to me, "I want to tell you something." And I was really listening to him. And he said, "I want you to meet my roommate. And I really want you to help my roommate." And I thought, well, I wasn't told by the accountant that there's a roommate in this very large home. But I said, okay. And he said, "Well, come down this way, follow me, and I'll introduce you to my roommate." So I followed him down this very dark, I'll never forget, corridor, all the way down, hallway, shall we say. There were a few cobwebs. It was dark. He turned the light on. He opened up one door, looked in there, and said, "No, this is not it. There's no roommate." He opened up another door. There was no roommate there either. He opened up the third door, and he looked, and then he looked in, and then he looked in the mirror, and he said, "There's my roommate." And he pointed to the mirror. And I thought, oh boy, we really, this is not good. Joe believed that he was his roommate. So Joe was telling me this story because he needed help, but he couldn't say, "I need help." So over the next probably 4 or 5 hours, I was able to transition him to a memory care community in San Francisco. When he arrived at the memory care community, he believed once he was inside that he was on board ship. And I followed Joe every week as care management and consulting. And sometimes I was the captain of that ship, and other times I was demoted and not the captain. But in any case, the importance of this story is that while Joe lived at this memory care community, he fell in love. He fell in love with Ethel. And Ethel was the mom of a neurologist, a local neurologist in San Francisco. And they held hands. He lightly kissed her on her cheek, and he fell in love with her. And he believed that that was his wife, and Ethel believed that that was her husband. So what is this about? In validation theory, or really it's about validating that person's reality, but also it's about that person goes back in time in their dementia, they go back in time to resolve unresolved issues. So Joe had found this woman that he felt was his wife, and I believe he was redoing his marriage so that he could feel a sense of closeness to Ethel. Unfortunately, Ethel fell and fractured her hip. And then unfortunately from there, she developed a pneumonia in the hospital and passed away. So my job, along with the administrator and her team at that memory care, was to get together and to figure out what is the best way to inform Joe of Ethel's passing. And what was decided, because people with his advanced level of Alzheimer's cannot process loss. They cannot process the passing of their loved one. So it was decided that we told him that Ethel was in rehabilitation. And every day Joe would ask whether I was there or the team, the staff at the community, memory care community, where was Ethel? When is she coming back? And he was told that she was getting better and that she would come back. Well, unfortunately, she didn't come back. After a while, Joe stopped asking about Ethel. But what we did do was to help preserve that sense of happiness he had with her. And he was able to continue to live out his life at that memory care community where he was validated and understood. So what happens when that person feels empowered? They have less anxiety, they have less withdrawal, they have a sense of improved self-worth, and they have a sense that, much more confidence. So when that patient or that family member, you're informing the family member really how to work with their loved one, they're gonna respond. They're gonna feel a lot more effective as individuals. That's really what you want to really get at. Now, I have to share with you the story also. Is Joe, Merchant Marine Joe, one day he actually escaped out of the memory care community, and he had slipped out with another resident's family member, and off he went into the streets of San Francisco. I received the call maybe a half an hour after they realized that Joe was missing. And so at that time, I had several interns working with me. And so off we went to look for Joe. The first place we went was his old home, but he wasn't there. The police were called, and some of the caregivers from that memory care community also hit the streets to look for Joe. Nobody could find Joe. He wasn't on a bus. Police couldn't find, the police started looking, this type of thing. Where was he? 5 hours went by, 8 hours went by, and it was starting to get dark. So then I received a phone call from one of the hospitals. It was actually California Pacific Medical Hospital. I'll never forget that. And they said, "Are you Dr. Jane?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we have Joe here." And I said, how did you find who I'm glad he's there. How did you find out to contact me? And they said inside his belt, he was wearing a belt, was my name and phone number. And I, of course, had forgotten, the previous year I wrote my name and phone number in his belt. Should he get lost, there was identification. So when I arrived at the hospital, I found Joe, and Joe said to me, where have you been? Where have you been? I came here looking for my wife. So clearly he had remembered Ethel. And I apologized to him that it took me so long for me to find him. So climbing into their world, the person with Alzheimer's, you really need to understand, that person has increasing memory loss. They have word finding problems. They may make up words. They have difficulty keeping up with conversations and television programs, and they may become lost easily. Sometimes they become tearful. Sometimes they become agitated. Sometimes they get frustrated. Sometimes they're having paranoia and they may hear or see things that are not real. So sometimes you're not sure where they are. So your job is to kind of figure out, where is that person in time? Where are they? And what was significant for that person in their life at that time? What is really where their passion and their sense of self is, right? So what makes that person feel valued? Yesterday, I happened to be in a memory care community here in Orange County, and I had recently transitioned one of my clients to this memory care community. For sure, the son said, there's absolutely no way, Dr. Jane, you're going to do this, and he's not going to stay, and he's going to be very difficult, and I doubt it'll be successful. I said, well, let's take a look at this. It turns out that this person spent his career in the Air Force flying airplanes. It just so happens that one of the classes at this memory care community is taught by somebody that has a love for airplanes. In addition, there's another resident that was also in the Air Force. So given these commonalities, this person now really likes where he is living. It is truly amazing because he has a sense of belonging, and the staff is keeping his story alive of what he did as in his career. What was he good at? So that's really where you want to kind of give back. It's giving really back their history, their knowledge, their sense of accomplishments, and engaging them in their past. Because if you ask them, well, what did you have for lunch today? They're going to probably say a sandwich, because that's a very common thing to have, right? But they really didn't. They're not going to remember what they had for lunch or for dinner or for breakfast. It doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. You really want to keep that person alive. It's really their treasures of who they are, by looking back at their history and then pulling that out. That's really what it's all about. Here are some magic words that I like to think of as gifts. Many times people do not, my clients do not remember my name, but they do remember me. And because there's an emotional connection. So just like they remember their children, even though they may think it may be their spouse or they don't know who they are, deep down, they know who they are. So saying things like, I'll be here all day if you need anything, even though I won't be there all day long. And saying things like, between the two of us, everything will be okay. Sometimes that person's going to be aware of their memory challenges. So you can say, I do things like that too, or I say things like that also, or I, can't remember either. And don't worry, I'll take care of it. And also, you're pretty important around here. A very established, very successful real estate broker somewhere here in Orange County now has moderate stage Alzheimer's disease. And she believes that she owns this memory care community. And the staff went so far as to actually get her like a name badge that says president. And she believes she owns the building. And it's validated by the staff, which is perfectly great, perfectly empowering for her. So validating this person, listening intently to what is being said, listening to also what is not being said, and accepting the person as they are. If you argue with the person that has a cognitive impairment, you're going to end up losing, just like the story of my grandmother at the slot machine. And you really want to promote the sense of who the person is. Here's another story of a lady named Mary. And Mary, at around 4 o'clock every day in her memory care community, would start banging on the doors, and she wanted out. And she was very upset, and she would cry, and the staff had a very difficult time redirecting her. And they were considering changing her medication because she was so angry, agitated, and upset. What was it about? The staff really had no idea. And so I learned her story, and what it was about was that she was waiting for her parents to pick her up. Now, Mary was 89 years old, and her parents were no longer here. So what are we going to do? She was waiting for her parents, and she wanted out of the community. So what was decided was this creative idea that I had was that every day the nurse, Sue, would call Mary on the phone. So Nurse Sue would use her cell phone, call the community's telephone landline, and tell her that it was the hotel calling, the Hilton Hotel calling, and that Mary had a phone call. And so Sue would say to Mary, this is the hotel calling, this is the Hilton or the Marriott or some other hotel, and your parents are running late and they're not able to pick you up. So Mary said some very colorful words. Remember, that's your word, you have to remember. But Mary said some very colorful words and hung up the phone and turned to the staff and said, my parents are always late. They're always late. And then some other words. And then the staff redirected her to setting up the table for dining for dinner. So this is a way, and this happened every day. This was an intervention that was done. She was not needing more or different kind of medication. It was a behavioral intervention that validated her reality. And that's what it's all about. So really, when memory loss becomes pervasive and severe, it disrupts work, hobbies, social activities, and family relationships. This is what this is about. You as physicians and clinicians, you understand how memory lapses can have an impact on daily performance and ability of what you want, of what that person can do. Validating them is really validating what they can do is really what you want to do. Set a story. I did share that with you. This is Seta, and that was an amazing story. Mr. Haig's story is a true story. And this is not his real name, and none of the names have been changed, of course. But Mr. Haig's story is a recent story. The multidisciplinary healthcare team, the brain health team in Armenia, did a home visit this past May, early June, to Haig and his daughter. They're living somewhere on the outskirts of Yerevan, and Haig had taken to his bed he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 5 years ago, and he's 90 years old. And he had hearing impairment, but the daughter also reported that he could no longer see, and the daughter felt that his eyesight was due to the Alzheimer's. So our physician, psychologist, and social worker met with him and the daughter over a period of two visits to the home. And it was decided that one of the things that we needed to do was, number one, was to see if we can have hearing aids, hearing evaluation for Haig, but also to have his eyes checked. Because we explained to the daughter that, the eyesight does change, depth perception may change, but the actual eyesight, ability to see, we don't think that this degree would be related to Alzheimer's. So our partner in Armenia, where we do early detection memory screening throughout the country, is with the Armenian Eye Care Project. And so we made an appointment for Haig to be seen by the Armenian Eye Care Project physicians. And sure enough, just as we thought, Haig had some pretty severe cataracts. So we were able to make arrangements for Haig to have the surgery. And the story is just an amazing story, because once Haig was able to see and once he was able to hear, his cognition actually improved. Haig is now attending the Healthy Aging Memory Club that Alzheimer's Care Armenia has at Mission Armenia. And he is starting, along with his daughter, to attend the Memory Cafe in Armenia too, in Yerevan too. So he was no longer retreating. He was no longer retreating because he felt more effective. And we took away a lot of the fear. So his own fear, we took that away by improving his hearing as well as his ability to see. Just a credible success story. So validating one's forgetfulness through redefining the understanding that the person has Alzheimer's disease is still present, even in the latter stages of the disease. It changes our approach and thinking about the disease, right? You really want to make life the best you can be for that person. And it really is all about just, empowering and validating. We all have three basic needs, whether or not we have, memory issue or not: to be loved, to express emotion, and to feel productive and useful. So these things don't go away as we age, or even when, we acquire an Alzheimer's type dementia or some other kind of dementia. So in closing, you and I can touch the person within when you really understand, how best to reach them. And so I hope this brief presentation was informative to you. I, think that, we can all reflect on, the people in our own lives, because I know many families have been touched by a loved one with dementia, and really how to empower them. So I want to thank you very much for having me today and for inviting me. Armenian American Medical Society, thank you very much, and take good care.